All right, Arasha, with Damien Cox and joined by Robert Vettauer, a tough position for Kelly Mermetz. And the one thing that struck me in that interview, Damien, was she mentioned Quebec in front of the home fans for Genie. They expect her to be here. We wanted the people in Quebec to see her. That maybe is the most alarming thing, that it's this tie that she chooses to miss when it was so easily put in front of her.
Well, she was here. She was basically down the road in Montreal. She was at a Montreal Canadiens game doing a corporate sponsorship, so I think that's part of the surprise. Look, I think there's a lot of elements to all of this. It's not just a simple thing, and I think you have to break it into those elements. First of all, did she handle this situation well? I'd say no, she didn't. She didn't say anything publicly. She showed up at that game at Montreal looking like she's just having fun and didn't feel like playing Fed Cup. At the same time, she has come and played for Canada time after time after time. If it wasn't for Genie Bouchard, Canada wouldn't even be in this tie today after victories over the Ukraine, over Serbia, and against Slovakia as well. So there's those elements. I don't think she handled it well. She has played well before. And I also had a long chat with Stacey Allister, who's the head of the WTA, the Women's Tennis Association. It's a mess right now between the ITF, International Tennis Federation, and how the Fed Cup is organized. And the players are really stuck in the middle as to when they can play and when they don't. And yes, some of the countries have their players this weekend, and some don't. And I really got the sense that that Allister and the rest of the women, I think she's generally frustrated over the state of Fed Cup. And I think some of the problems with Fed Cup will soon be reaching to Davis Cup as well. And I think the ITF has really got to start rethinking how it organizes these international team events and stop putting the players in the middle of it.
Some of the problem maybe for Genie publicly is the fact that Milos Raonic has answered the call every time. He obviously and openly loves and embraces the team concept. So in the case of the women's side with the Fed Cup, this is unique for Canada because we've never had a player of her stature, and that changes everything because of the goals for her on the world stage.
Well, like Damien said, I think there's a lot of different factors involved in this one, but there's a couple of things that stand out. One is that this is a historic Fed Cup tie. First time Canada is in the World Group top 8, playing the #1 country in the world. This tie was really set up and staged for Genie Bouchard. So that's a surprise. I think that's a surprise that in her schedule she would not see this as an important week and a stepping stone to being #1 in the world and winning a Grand Slam. Fed Cup and representing your country should not be incompatible in terms of your overall objectives, notwithstanding scheduling issues. So I think that that's an issue, and I think that the way this was communicated or not communicated is something that should be a learning curve for Genie Bouchard. I mean, this is her country, this is her teammate. She led this team for the past 2 years. Definitely this all could have been handled better. The optics aren't ideal. There's no question, if you ask the question, is it better for Canadian tennis that Genie Bouchard wins Wimbledon or plays Fed Cup? You'd argue winning Wimbledon. I understand that. Yeah. But I'll get back to my earlier point. Representing the country should not be incompatible with your overall goals.
Yeah, and that's an interesting part of it, incompatible with your overall goals. One of the things people forget, when men play Davis Cup, they get ranking points. Women don't get ranking points when they play Fed Cup. So you really are giving something up. You're giving up the opportunity to get ranking points and move towards #1, and you're giving up income for what you might win. She's playing at a tournament in Antwerp, Belgium. Tournament director there is Kim Kleisters, who I'm sure put a lot of pressure on Bouchard to play. She's the #1 seed there, but an opportunity to win a relatively new tournament, and that's where you really get into the push-pull, and then she has to make her own individual decisions, and we know the grind the tour plays on it. 43 weeks a year they have the tour going. You got to take a break sometime. So, I wish she was here. But I do think that again, the tour and the ITF have somehow got to get together and make it more possible for the women to play. And again, I think it's going to become even more of an issue with Davis Cup as well.
And to be fair, Genie began hinting at that this time last year. The highlights you saw were from Easter weekend a year ago that got Canada to this point. And she said, I want to play, but we need to work it out with the ITF. So last word on this to you, Rob, before we get set for match #2. Does it worry you more, beyond the obvious, if she doesn't show up in April, whether they win here or whether they don't? Does it become a pattern in your mind then, and do they lose her for good in the Fed Cup?
Well, I don't think they will lose her for good over the next couple of years, because to qualify for the Olympics in 2016, she has to play at least one Fed Cup tie in that period between this year and next year. But if she would not make herself available in April, it would really put the Canadian team in a tough situation, dropping back down to Group 2 and possibly next year back into the qualifying. That's not really acceptable. Plus, in my heart of hearts, I believe that Genie Bouchard is a very patriotic Canadian. I mean, we saw her over the last 3 years lead this team, wear the maple leaf on her cheek. And so I think a lot of what's in play here is for her figuring out life, being a superstar, emerging superstar on the tour. Indeed. And Damien, you're right. This is a big issue that the Fed Cup does not give world ranking points for Fed Cup play as Davis Cup does.
But you know why they don't? Because the WTA, the players don't want it to.
Yeah.
That's why they don't give it to
I don't understand.
A lot of different opinions. And yeah, not fair to pile on Genie Bouchard at any point, and especially not yet. And take a look, Damien, again, we talked about this in the opening, not unique as you look at half the top 10 is not in action.
Yeah, and that's, but they don't play all the time. And Sharapova, for example, has rarely played for Russia. So that's a bonus for that country to have her available in it. But you know, it's a constant issue. Canada really in some ways got to this point because, for example, the Slovaks didn't bring their best players to Canada the last time around. So it's an ongoing thing. And the countries that really benefit are the countries like the Czech Republic. They can go and miss their 2 top players. The issue for Canada is they're going to have to find depth. And maybe it lies with Françoise Abanda, maybe it lies with, you know, Catherine Sabov and the other young woman they have with them this weekend, the lefty. And, you know, they've got some other players, but you've got to develop depth. That's the importance of having more than one star, as they do with Eugenie
6
Bouchard.
players used by the Czech Republic last year to win the Fed Cup. That is depth. So we turn our attention to the second match. Robert, you'll head back upstairs with Jim Van Horn as Gabriela Dabrowski makes her debut as a singles player in the Fed Cup, taking on Teresa Smitkova. We'll talk about that when we come back to the campus of Laval University. Canada down 1 in this Fed Cup tie.